The morning was quiet at Arlington National Cemetery, where rows of white stones stretched endlessly across the green grass. A light mist hung in the air, softening the edges of everything. The sound of footsteps and distant whispers faded as visitors gathered near the tomb of the unknown soldier. It was one of those moments where time seemed to slow down, a place where silence spoke louder than words. Among the visitors was a group of young military cadets, neatly dressed in their uniforms. They were there to witness the changing of the guard, a ceremony they had only seen in videos before. For them, it was more than just a routine. It was a symbol of respect, something sacred and unforgettable. Some of them stood tall with pride. Others tried to hide their nervousness. They wanted to prove that they understood what honor meant. The tomb guard, a soldier in a perfectly pressed uniform, marched back and forth in front of the marble tomb. Every movement was sharp, precise, and measured, as if time itself followed his steps. The crowd remained silent, watching in awe. The sound of his shoes clicking against the stone echoed in the air, steady and powerful. In the front row stood Sergeant Matthew Cole, another tomb guard, off duty that day but always watchful. He had served at the tomb for years, known for his discipline and quiet strength. To him, the tomb wasn't just a monument, it was a promise, a vow to protect the memory of those who could no longer speak for themselves. As the ceremony neared its end, one of the young cadets was given a special task. He was chosen to assist in a flag presentation. His hands trembled slightly as he held the folded American flag, its colors bright even under the gray sky. The rain from earlier had left patches of mud on the ground, but no one paid much attention to it. When the command was given, the cadet stepped forward. His boots sank slightly into the soft earth. He tried to keep his focus, his eyes fixed on the officer waiting to receive the flag. But nerves got the better of him. As he unfolded the flag, a gust of wind caught one corner. Before he could react, the flag slipped from his hands and touched the wet mud. A sharp gasp ran through the crowd. The air suddenly felt heavy. The young cadet froze, eyes wide, as if his heart had stopped beating. He reached out but then hesitated, unsure what to do. The other cadets looked at him, their faces pale. No one moved. Sergeant Matthew Cole had seen it all. He stood silently at the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable. For him, the flag was more than fabric and thread. It represented sacrifice, courage, and the countless lives that had been given for freedom. Seeing it lying on the ground stirred something deep within him, but he didn't shout. He didn't scold. Instead, he took a slow step forward, then another. The sound of his boots echoed through the silence, steady and controlled. Every eye turned toward him as he walked with purpose, the rain starting to fall again in soft drops. The cadet's breath caught in his throat. He felt tears sting his eyes, embarrassed and ashamed. But Cole didn't look angry. His face was calm, his jaw set, his eyes focused only on the flag. When he reached it, he bent down carefully, every motion filled with respect. He picked up the flag gently as if it were something sacred. The white gloves on his hands were now smudged with mud, but he didn't care. He held the flag close to his chest, straightened up and took a deep breath. The crowd remained completely silent. For a long moment, no one moved. The soft rain tapped against the stones and the sound of distant birds filled the air. Cole looked at the flag, brushed off the mud with care and made sure every fold was perfect again. Then without a word, he turned and carried it back toward the ceremony stand. The young cadet lowered his head, feeling the weight of what had just happened. But there was no anger in the air and only a powerful lesson. Cole placed the flag back where it belonged, adjusted it neatly and took one step back. His movements were slow and respectful, as if to remind everyone watching that some things deserve silence more than speeches. The commanding officer, who had been watching quietly, nodded slightly. He understood that words weren't needed. The act itself had spoken louder than any reprimand could. Sergeant Cole returned to his position at the edge of the platform. His uniform was still neat, though the gloves showed marks of earth and water. He stood tall, eyes straight ahead as the ceremony continued. The crowd slowly let out the breath they had been holding. Some wiped their eyes, touched by what they had just seen. The young cadet would never forget that moment. In his mind, the image of Cole lifting the flag from the mud burned deeply, not as a mistake, but as a reminder of what honor truly means. He realized then that respect isn't shown through words or medals, but through quiet actions when no one expects them. When the ceremony ended, people began to leave slowly, Still whispering about the tomb guard who had stepped forward without hesitation, the sky began to clear, and sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow over the marble tomb. Sergeant Cole stood there for a few more minutes, looking out at the endless rows of graves. He thought about the soldiers resting beneath them, the known and the unknown, and felt a calm sense of duty in his heart. He didn't do it for recognition. He didn't do it to be seen. He did it because, to him, the flag was a symbol of every life given, every promise kept, and every tear shed for the sake of freedom. And as the wind blew softly through the trees, the flag now resting safely in its place, it almost felt as if the silence of that sacred ground whispered back its gratitude, not in words, but in the peace that followed. The rain had stopped, leaving small drops of water clinging to the marble stones and the blades of grass. The air smelled clean and fresh, but there was still a heaviness in the atmosphere, a weight that came not from the weather, but from the moment everyone had just witnessed. The young cadet who dropped the flag stood still, not moving an inch. His hands were still at his sides, trembling slightly. He could not look up. The memory of the flag slipping away replayed again and again in his mind, each time making his chest tighten with guilt. He wished he could take that moment back, but he knew he couldn't. Sergeant Matthew Cole stood quietly a few feet away, his gloved hands folded in front of him. The mud stains on his white gloves were clear, but he didn't wipe them away. The flag was back in its place, folded perfectly, resting in a clean case. The crowd had mostly left, but the feeling of silence still surrounded the area. The commanding officer finally stepped forward. He placed a firm hand on the young cadet's shoulder and spoke softly. "Do you understand what you just witnessed?" His tone was not angry, but filled with meaning. The cadet nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. I understand." But the truth was, he didn't fully understand, not yet. It would take time for him to feel the depth of what had just happened. The officer turned to Sergeant Cole and gave a respectful nod. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said quietly. Cole returned the nod without saying a word. He didn't need to. His actions had already said everything that needed to be said. As the day went on, the young cadets gathered in a small group under a nearby tree. None of them laughed or joked like they had that morning. The event had changed the mood completely. One of them finally broke the silence. "Did you see the way he picked it up? Like he was lifting something alive." Another cadet nodded. "He didn't even get angry, he just did it." They all looked back toward the tomb. From where they stood, they could still see Cole standing guard again, his posture straight and unshaken, even after what had happened. He looked calm, not proud or proud-looking, but peaceful, as if doing the right thing was simply a part of who he was. The young cadet who dropped the flag walked a little away from the group and sat alone on a bench. He looked at his hands, remembering how they had failed to hold the flag tightly. He felt a tear roll down his cheek, but he quickly wiped it away before anyone saw. He thought about Sergeant Cole, how he had stepped forward, not to embarrass him, but to protect the honor of something greater. That quiet act spoke to him in a way no classroom or speech ever had. It was not about punishment. It was about respect. Later, as the sun began to break through the clouds, the group of cadets was asked to attend a brief meeting with the commanding officer. They entered the small briefing room near the visitor center, still quiet, still unsure what to expect. The officer stood at the front, his hands behind his back. "What you saw today," he began, "was not just a ceremony. It was a lesson. There are things in our service that cannot be taught by books or drills. They must be witnessed. They must be felt." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Sergeant Cole reminded us of something important, that respect is silent. It doesn't always need words. It doesn't seek attention. It's shown in how we carry ourselves and what we protect, and in the care we give to symbols like that flag." The cadets listened closely. Some of them had tears in their eyes, though none spoke. After the meeting, the cadet who had dropped the flag stayed behind. He approached the officer and asked softly, "Sir, may I speak to Sergeant Cole?" The officer nodded. "You may, but I'll tell you this, he probably won't say much. He lets his actions speak for him." The cadet nodded and made his way back to the tomb area. Cole was still there, standing guard with his rifle at his side, his movements slow and precise. When the ceremony ended and another guard replaced him, Cole stepped aside, finally free to rest for a few minutes. The young cadet walked up, his heart pounding. "Sergeant Cole," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Cole looked at him for a moment, then gave a small nod. His eyes were calm, not cold or harsh, just steady. You don't have to be sorry, he said in a low voice. You learned something today. That's what matters. The cadet nodded quickly. Yes, sir, I did. I'll never forget it. Cole's face softened slightly and a faint smile appeared for a brief second. Then it was worth it. He didn't say another word after that. He simply adjusted his cap, straightened his back, and walked away, heading down the marble path with the same calm steps he always took. The young cadet stood there, watching him disappear into the distance. The feeling that filled his heart was not shame anymore, and it was understanding. He realized that mistakes can become powerful lessons if one is willing to learn from them. That evening, as the sun set behind the trees and the sky turned orange and gold, the cadet sat by his bunk and wrote in his notebook. He didn't write about the embarrassment or the mistake. He wrote about the silence. The moment when a man in a white-gloved uniform lifted the flag from the mud without saying a word, and how that silence spoke louder than any lecture could. He ended the note with one line: "Respect is not taught. It's shown." When he closed the notebook, he felt lighter. That single act had changed how he saw everything: his duty, his uniform, even the flag itself. It was no longer just a piece of fabric. It was a reminder of the people who had given everything for the country it represented. The next morning, when the cadets returned for another ceremony, they stood straighter, their hands firmer on their caps. The memory of the flag in the mud would never fade, but neither would the sight of Sergeant Cole lifting it with grace. From that day on, the young cadet made a silent promise to himself that he would never let disrespect, carelessness, or fear come between him and his duty. He didn't need to be perfect, but he would always remember the lesson of the tomb guard. Honor is not spoken, it's lived. And though many days and many ceremonies would come and go, that one moment, when the guard stepped forward in silence, would stay in his heart forever, like an unspoken vow shared between soldiers across generations. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that moment at the tomb of the unknown soldier never faded. For the young cadets, it became more than just a story. It became a quiet lesson they carried in their hearts. Every time they saw the flag raised, folded, or flown, they remembered the sight of Sergeant Matthew Cole bending down in the rain, lifting it from the mud with both hands. For Sergeant Cole, life returned to its usual rhythm. Every morning he reported for duty, checked his uniform, shined his shoes, and stood in his post guarding the tomb. He followed every step, every movement, every command with the same discipline as always. He didn't talk about that day. To him, it wasn't something to boast about. It was just what any guard should do when faced with such a moment. But others couldn't forget it. The story began to quietly spread. One of the cadets who had been there wrote about the experience in an online journal. His words were simple but full of emotion. He described the silence, the respect, and the way the tomb guard's actions had touched everyone present. He didn't name himself or the other cadets. He just told the story as it happened, pure and honest. The story was shared again and again. People read it, felt moved, and passed it along. Some said it brought tears to their eyes. Others said it reminded them of what true respect means. It reached families of veterans, teachers, and even young students who were learning about patriotism and duty for the first time. Soon, a local newspaper wrote about it. The headline read, "A Silent Act of Respect at Arlington, One Soldier's Lesson to the Nation." Readers responded with letters and messages, thanking the unknown guard for his quiet strength. Some said they felt a renewed sense of pride. Others simply said, "Thank you." When Sergeant Cole's commanding officer showed him the article, Cole read it silently, then folded the paper and handed it back. "I was just doing my job, sir," he said calmly. The officer smiled softly. "That's exactly why it matters," he replied. Cole didn't seek attention. He didn't go on television or give interviews. When people asked, he simply said, "Respect doesn't need an audience." Those were the only words he ever offered about that day. Meanwhile, the cadet who had dropped the flag continued his training with a new sense of purpose. The mistake that once made him feel small had now become his greatest teacher. He practiced harder, learned deeper, and carried himself with more care. Other cadets noticed the change in him. He spoke little but always acted with quiet focus. When asked what had changed, he would simply say, "I saw what respect looks like." Months later, during a special ceremony, the same cadet was chosen to carry the flag again, the very flag that had once fallen to the ground. It had been carefully cleaned and preserved, its colors bright as ever. As he held it this time, his hands were steady. There was no trembling, no fear. He felt peace, the kind that comes when one truly understands the weight of what they carry. The ceremony went perfectly. Every fold was crisp, every movement sharp, and as the final salute was given, the cadet's eyes lifted toward the sky. He didn't see the flag as cloth anymore. He saw every story, every sacrifice, every promise it represented. When the ceremony ended, he looked toward Sergeant Cole, who stood silently among the crowd. Their eyes met for just a second. Cole gave a small nod, and simple, calm, but full of meaning. It was not praise. It was acknowledgement, a soldier's way of saying, "You've learned." After that, life continued. New guards came, new ceremonies were held, but that one story lived on. Teachers shared it with their students, soldiers shared it with new recruits, and parents told it to their children when teaching them about honor. The story had become more than an event. It had become a message that true respect is not shown by loud words but by quiet actions. Years later, when Sergeant Cole retired from active duty, his final day at Arlington was calm and beautiful. The sky was clear and the wind moved softly through the trees. As he took his last walk along the path of the tomb, his steps were slow but proud. The guards saluted him as he passed. There were no speeches, no grand ceremony, only the same silence that had defined his years of service. When he reached the end of his post, he turned one last time to face the tomb. He stood still for a long moment, remembering every hour he had spent there, every sunrise, every raindrop, every whisper of the wind. And then, in his heart, he remembered that morning long ago, the flag in the mud, the young cadet's pale face, the weight of silence in the air. He took a deep breath, placed his hand over his heart, and whispered quietly to himself, "For them." That night, as the sun went down, the flag over Arlington caught the last golden light of the day. It fluttered gently in the wind, strong and free. Visitors walking by didn't know the full story, but they felt something, a quiet peace that seemed to come from the very ground beneath their feet. In time, a small plaque was placed near the walkway, not naming anyone, but simply saying, "In silent respect, honor lives on." Visitors who read it often paused for a moment, feeling something stir in their hearts. Some bowed their heads, others placed a hand over their chest. No one needed to be told what it meant. The silence was enough. As for the cadet who had once dropped the flag, he went on to serve with distinction. Years later, he too returned to Arlington, this time as an officer. When he stood by the tomb again, watching a new generation of guards march in perfect step, he felt a quiet pride. He remembered the lesson he had learned not through words, but through the stillness of a man who understood what honor truly meant. He stood there for a while, his cap held in his hands, the wind brushing gently across his face. Then he whispered softly, "Thank you, Sergeant Cole." The breeze carried his words away, and for a brief moment, it almost felt as though the air itself responded. Calm, steady, eternal. The tomb guard continued his walk, his steps echoing through the marble courtyard. The flag waved proudly above, untouched, bright, and clean, a symbol of sacrifice and respect that would never fade. And though time would move on and generations would change, the story of that one silent act, the guard who picked up the flag from the mud, would live forever in the hearts of those who understood what true honor really means.